welcome back. Today we're going to be going through a flip through of my 2025 reading journal setup. First things first, this is the journal that I decided to use. This is from Notebook Therapy and I'm really in love with it. It has this like velvet cover and then it also has these sprayed edges, these gilded edges, which I don't think you'll be able to see once I fill this fully up. You can kind of already tell the pages that I've used have started warping and the image isn't becoming as clear, but I think that it's really beautiful. I think that this is sold out on their website, unfortunately, but Notebook Therapy does sometimes bring stuff back, so if you really love this, I would keep an eye on it. One other thing that I wanted to quickly mention is I do have process videos for setting these up, but I'm kind of doing this video backwards to how people normally do it. I am putting the process videos at the end and doing the flip through at the front because I filmed all of the process videos for TikTok, and so they have the vertical aspect ratio instead of the horizontal aspect ratio for almost all of the spreads. There's one spread that I didn't set up until after the year started, so that one has the horizontal aspect ratio, but everything else has a non-YouTube friendly aspect ratio. So I put those all in case you would like to watch the process videos, but since they're in that weird aspect ratio, I didn't want to put them in at the beginning and force everyone to watch them in order to see the flip through. So with that being said, let's get into a flip through of all of the pages I set up in my 2025 reading journal. First things first, we have my intro page, which this year I did this like Dutch door kind of thing with it. And my theme that I picked for my 2025 reading journal was this like fairy tale mushroom forest whimsical storybook kind of theme. I picked out this font that like evoked storybook vibes to me and made it very fairy tale-esque and whimsical throughout the setup, and picked all of the colors to match this intro picture that I did. And then I did end up gluing the first two pages together, which will hopefully keep this notebook from separating. I've had issues with my past two notebooks separating at this very front page about halfway into the year. So I'm hoping that gluing these first two pages together will help prevent that, but I guess we'll see as the year goes on. And then before I keep going too far, I did also want to show off my fold out page, which is where I have my rating system over here, and this is a little pocket, and then it has the little rating system here, and this is a variation on the compile rating system, but I've changed it up a little bit to have some genre specific questions, and so this folds out and has the genre specific questions, and then the back I use for the nonfiction statuses and meanings and questions and everything. And the reason that I do this in a fold out is so that I'll show you if I'm doing the ratings, I can see this and pull it out if I'm ever unsure of what to rate something. I'm usually pretty good about knowing what questions to ask myself, but if I'm in between ratings for something, I'll usually fold this out and pull it out to really analyze what I would like to rate something. And then the other thing that's in this fold out is this little reading challenges pocket. I am planning to put a world map in here because a new thing that I'm doing is I want to read a book from every country in the world, or as many as possible, and that is going to take me multiple years, so I didn't want to just put it in this reading journal and have to copy it into every reading journal that I made after this. So I made this little pocket for reading challenges, and that map will go in here. And then also this one is for the fantasy bingo, which goes from April to March every year, and so this also covered 2 years, so I just pasted it in to my previous reading journal with some washi tape and then pulled it out, and I'm putting it in this reading challenges pocket now in this journal. So that is how I do my front little fold out, and then my intro page is the Dutch door, and that goes straight into my pages tracker, which this is my definitely most used spread that I have in every reading journal that I do. This is like a year in pixels, but with pages, And so I just track the number of pages that I read every day. And then I have a different pattern for every format that I read in. And I did kind of mess up here when I was making this. I accidentally reversed the digital and physical from what I usually do. In my past 2 journals, the digital has been the horizontal lines and the physical has been the diagonal lines. So I have messed up a couple of times and started putting the wrong thing in, but I'll get used to it soon. And I didn't realize until after I made the spread, so oh well. Next, we have my release radar spread. This also used to have a different setup in my old journals, but I used to have the calendars on there and I did not really need the calendars because books always come out on Tuesdays. That's kind of a publishing rule. And so I was like, I don't really need to have the calendars. I know what day of the week all of these books are coming out on. I just really need the dates. So instead, I made these little library card kind of things. And these flip up in case I need it. But if I don't need it, I'm planning to glue them down. So like for January, I'll probably glue this down at the end of the month. But as you can see, March is pretty stacked, so I might have to flip over to the back. So any that I run out of space, I have the option to flip over to the back, but I can always paste these down if I don't need to. So that is my release radar, how I have that set up for all of the upcoming releases that I'm excited about for the year. Then we have my book tracker, which is just where I track every single book that I read throughout the year. This one I also made into a Dutch door so that I could have some more space and not have to redo the header or my rating color code at the bottom. And my reading goal is always 72 books per year. That's just like my average reading speed, and I make that my reading goal every year. I'm not really too pressed about my reading goal ever. It's always kind of a thing where I'm like, oh, this is my average reading speed, so that's my reading goal. But if I don't hit it, I'm not too upset about it. And if I go over it, it's always exciting, but it's not like making the world for me. So it's pretty low key for my reading goal. But I did run out of room last year, so I made sure to give myself some buffer space. And then I just print out the book covers for every book that I read and put them in here. And then the star rating is what the colors in the background mean. So I just do that for every book that I read, and it turns out really colorful and cool at the end of the year when I have all of the book covers and everything in there. Then we have my book bracket, which I really love how I switched this up this year. The past 2 years have done it kind of vertically, and where the months go across horizontally and then the rankings go down vertically. But I decided when I was setting it up this year that I wanted to do the book covers in these. So I made these the same size as my book tracker so that I could put the covers into these boxes because I thought that would be really fun. But the way that I had it set up previously, I definitely would not have been able to fit that. And then also the way that I used to have it set up was every 2 months would be compared. So then you'd have 6 books in the second round and 3 books in the final round. And I didn't really love that because I was like, these don't really have any meaning to me, and I didn't like having 3 at the end. So when I was redoing this, I had the idea to pair 3 books up at the beginning, so I would end up in the second round with my favorite book that I read each quarter of the year, and then my finalists would be like my favorite book from each half of the year, and then I will have my book at the end. I decided to highlight this a little extra with some craft paper and a little bit of decoration, and then this one will be bigger, obviously, as well. So I'm really excited about how I set this up. This might be my favorite spread in this setup for the 2025 reading journal. I just love how it turned out. I think it's very cute and whimsical, and I'm very excited to use it as well. Next, we're getting into the single page spreads. So on the left hand side, we have my 25 in 2025, which is pretty much what it sounds like. It's just 25 books that I want to prioritize reading this year. And I color code it. So I have this little bar at the bottom of each cover that gets colored in with what month I read it in. So as you can see, these 3 I've already read in January, so they have been colored in, and I always pick a color that matches my intro page. So if you remember, my intro page is a very blue, so I decided to go with this kind of royal blue color for January for this, and then also for my physical TBR spread in a couple of pages. But yeah, this is just the 25 books in 2025, and it's really a simple setup. Then on the right hand side, we have my series. Here I wrote down anything that I was actively in the middle of or could continue this year. I didn't write down anything that I wouldn't be able to read this year. I didn't want to like keep track of things that I wouldn't be able to read at all this year. So this is just all of the series that I'm in the middle of and have the ability to continue this year. And they just have a little dot for each book that is in the series, and then they get crossed out anytime I finish a book or any books that I've already read. And then at the bottom, we have my little DNF graveyard. I don't tend to DNF too many books, so I didn't make my graveyard too big, but I know a lot of people DNF a lot of books, so you could definitely make this a lot bigger if you wanted to. Last year, I DNF'd 6 books, and most of those were soft DNFs that I was planning to come back to. So I figured I would keep the same number of graveyards since I didn't run out of room last year. Then we have my physical tracker spread kind of thing, and this is kind of, I've been adding this in because a lot of people will do these kind of trackers for their book trackers. So I have the rectangles with the covers and everything, but a lot of people will do like the really big bookshelves. And I wanted to include the bookshelves somewhere, but I really love the way that I do my book tracker and that I can keep track of all my ratings and everything and the covers. I love seeing all of the covers for all of the books that I've read throughout the year. And so this was kind of like my compromise to doing the really big multi-page bookshelf things that people do, was to keep track of my physical books in a little mini version of that. So I just keep track of any books that I read in physical format that I've knocked off of my physical TBR. And this has the same color coding as my 25 in 2025. Then on the right hand side, we have my library savings page. This, I pretty much just write down any book that I get from the library and what format I read it in, and then what price it would have been if I had bought it instead of getting it from the library. And then at the end, I total up all my savings that I have from using the library that year. All right, these are the last 2 spreads in my 2025 reading journal setup. They both have to do with book clubs. And this side I originally didn't know what I wanted to do with, so I actually set up this page after the year already started, which is why it doesn't necessarily match the theme, but I'll explain what this is and kind of why I chose to make it not match the theme. But the left-hand side is just my book club tracker. For this, I print out a little copy of the book cover that I read for book club, and then I'll put my star rating up this side over here, so my book cover takes up like maybe this much space, and then the star rating will go there. And this is for the All Shades Book Club, which is hosted by Sarah. I'll tag Sarah's channel below. I love her and I love being a part of her book club. So that's what this is for. And then on this side, this is the traveling book club that I'm doing this year. So if you don't know what a traveling book club is, it is where every person that's in the group picks out a different book and you all read them in physical format, and then you send it off to the next person in the group, and each person annotates the book, and then when you get your book back at the end, you basically have annotations from everyone. And I'm really excited for this, and I decided to make this not match the theme as much because this is very focused on like mail and sending things to each other, so I made it very like mail and stationery and letters and packages themed to kind of go in line with what the traveling book club is all about. And that is my very last spread that I have in my 2025 reading journal setup. If you'd like to see the process videos for all of those, feel free to stick around. But if not, I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Now on to the actual process videos. These are mostly in order from front to back, except the fold-out setup is last, as that's always the last thing I set up so that I can keep my cheat sheets and challenges and stuff in my old journal as long as possible. All right, getting into the intro page. Like I said, my theme for the yearly pages this year was a kind of mushroom fairytale storybook kind of theme to match the mushroom cover on this journal. I was going for a very whimsical fairy tale feeling. The first thing I did for my intro page was I drew this little mushroom forest scene on a separate piece of paper. For the most part, I used different paints and paint pens to make this drawing. Unfortunately, a lot of these pens are from Archer & Olive, and Archer & Olive sells nothing regularly anymore. They only sell special releases, which is super frustrating to me, but I can't really link any of the supplies for this intro page, unfortunately. Once this drawing is all finished up, I cut out right to the edge of the frame and pasted it in the journal. Then I picked this like swirly storybook kind of font, and I think this font really tied the theme together across all my yearly pages. As you saw during the flip through and will see during the rest of the process videos, I used this font everywhere, and it was really the big thing that was consistent through all the spreads. Finally, I cut out around where I pasted the artwork in. After I finished filming this, I did go in and add some white dots all around the sky for stars, which you saw during the flip through, but I forgot I wanted to add those while I was filming. Moving along to my page tracker, I always put this at the very front of my journal because it is by far my most used spread, so I need easy access. The majority of setting up this spread is just setting up the grid that will get filled in throughout the year, 1 box per day. Each box will get colored in with a different color based on how many pages I read, and then filled in with a pattern based on the formats I read in. I picked the colors to be the same colors that I used on my cover page, so my page ranges are tan for 1 to 50 pages, red for 51 to 100 pages, gold for 101 to 150 pages, green for 151 to 200 pages, and navy for over 200 pages. Physically is notated by vertical lines, digital by diagonal lines, and audio by dots. For the page header, I used that same typography as the cover page to really tie it all together, and I think it's really fun having this be slightly visible under the Dutch Door intro page. I'm excited to see how it looks at the end of the year with all of the pages filled in. Onto the upcoming release tracker. Like I mentioned earlier, for the past couple of years for this spread, I've done kind of this just like rolling list of releases I'm excited about, but I pretty much always ran out of room and had to haphazardly add extra pages in. And it was also very disorganized because I couldn't always keep all of a particular month's releases together. So this year I'm trying something new. This year I designated a little area for each month to hopefully not run out of room and also keep everything a little more organized. For this spread, I had the idea to make the areas for each month look like a little library book checkout cards, and I did that on the same craft paper I used in my intro page setup to really tie it all together. When I inserted the craft paper, I made sure to only glue in the title area so that the inserts could be flipped up if I needed a little extra room, but like I mentioned, I'm probably going to glue down at the bottom on any of these inserts where I don't need the extra room, just so I can not have all of these flopping papers all over. To keep with the theme even more, I also added these little mushroom doodles all overlapping with the library card inserts. Next up, we have the book tracker. This past year was the first year I used this spread to also keep track of what books I was reading in what order. Previously, I had just made a bunch of numbered squares and colored them in based on rating, but last year I started adding pictures, and I really like being able to see all of the books I read in one year in one spread. However, it was a very tight squeeze last year to get enough squares into this spread, and I had no buffer spots if I went over my reading goal, and I also had no room for header or a spot to keep track of what colors I used for each rating, so I had to tape in a piece of paper in order to keep track of that. So this year I knew I needed to have this spread go over multiple pages in order to not have it be so packed and to have all of the info I needed within the journal itself instead of having to add extra pages in. So this time around I chopped off the top and bottom of this middle page so I can put my header at the top and the ratings at the bottom, but still make the spaces large enough to hold my book covers. This way I also have 80 spots, so I have a little bit of a buffer if I end up going over my reading goal. For my rating colors this past year, I just picked kind of random colors, but for this year, I picked colors that matched my theme and are the same colors plus some extras as my page tracker. So I'm having tan colors be 1/2 star and 1 star, 2 deep reds being 1.5 and 2 stars, 2 golden yellow colors be 2.5 and 3 stars, 2 foresty greens be 3.5 and 4 stars, and 2 dark blues be 4.5 and 5 stars. At the end of filming, when I was filming this, my phone was running out of battery, and so I was rushing a little bit. But after I finished filming, I realized I forgot that I wanted to do this, but I also added a little gold border on the side of the middle page where the edge flips up, just to add a little bit of a pop so it doesn't fully blend into the page behind it, which you saw during the flip through. Onto my book bracket, aka my favorite spread of this whole setup. Like I mentioned, for the past 2 years, I had pretty much the same book bracket setup, but I was looking to change it up this year as I wanted to include pictures, and my previous book brackets were from top to bottom instead of left to right, so they wouldn't really allow for that. And that layout would have also prevented me from using the storybook kind of typography that I've been using throughout this whole setup, as I would always have to squish the title into the bottom right corner, but these storybook headers are just too big for that. So after much searching and sketching and erasing, I finally settled on this layout that will still have me select my favorite book from every month, but instead of me comparing every 2 months for the first narrowing round, I compare all 3 picks from each quarter of the year, which, now that I've done it, just makes so much more sense to me, and I'm really pleased that I had this random idea. This spread was also the first spread I set up so far this year that I had any real white space to play around with, where I could add some more doodles to the page to make it match the intro page and theme even more. I decided to add a little doodle on each side of the spread above the title of the page. On the left side, I did this little mushroom terrarium kind of thing and made the little mushroom house in the terrarium match the mushroom house from my intro page. And on the right side, I did a mushroom and frog drawing, which if you've ever watched any kind of bullet journal content, I'm sure you know this is inspired by Mander H. Lee. Then in the top 2 corners, I added some little gold string lights like what are on the mushroom house on my intro page, so it didn't look quite so blank up there. I kept the boxes very simple for each month, quarter, and finalist, but made the winner's square to be set on some craft paper, and I added a little bit of gold bordering to make it stand out extra as the winner. Getting into the single spread setups with the 25 and 2025 spread, this past year was the first year I included any kind of priority TBR kind of spread, and it didn't go as well as I was hoping. I debated on whether I even wanted to do this again in 2025 when I was setting this up, but I really looked over what went wrong with the 2024 list, and I think that I got so off track because I did not have a varied enough selection in the books I picked for my 2024 list. Almost all of the books were fantasy books, and while I do read a lot of fantasy, I also read a lot of other genres, and selecting almost only fantasy books didn't really give me the opportunity to just look at the list and pick something off of it based on what I was in the mood for. Additionally, more than half of the books I picked were books that I own physically, and only 2 or 3 of the books were books that I was wanting to read in audiobook format, but audio is my most read format, so only picking books I wanted to read with my eyes and picking majority books I would need to read in physical format kind of set me up for failure. For this year, I tried to set up a variety of genres and picked a majority of books that I'm okay reading either in audio or with my eyes, and this is already going way better than it went in 2024. As far as the layout goes, this spread is super simple. I just set up a little box for every book cover and then added a small rectangle underneath that will get colored in based on what month I read the book in. The books I selected for my 25 in 2025 are A Love Song for Ricky Wilde by Tia Williams, A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon, which I decided to carry over from my 24 in 2024, Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, Written in the Stars by Alexandra Bellefleur, The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri, Serpent and Dove by Shelby Marin, Kindred by Octavia Butler, Most Ardently by Gabe Cole Novoa, Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Kaw, A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, White Scars, Brown Tears by Ruby Hamad, Model Home by Rivers Solomon, Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reed, Celestial Monsters by Aidan Thomas, Black Sun by Rebecca Rowanhorse, which is the only other book I carried over from my 24 and 2024, Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane, An Ember in the Ashes by Sabatihir, We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, Year of the Reaper by Makia Lucier, The Spirit Bears Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White, Kaikei by Vaishnavi Patel, Slewfoot by Brahm, Blood Justice by Terry J. Benton Walker, and Mooncakes by Suzanne Walker. Shifting over to the other side of the spread, we have my series tracker and my DNF tracker for next year. These two trackers were not originally combined in the past year's reading journal, but I eliminated the two trackers that went with both of these because I didn't really use them. The series tracker was previously with my reread tracker, but I didn't end up using that hardly at all, so I got rid of that. And my DNF graveyard was originally with my books to unhaul list, but I didn't really use that at all either, since I kind of just know in my brain what books I want to unhaul, and I don't really feel like I need to keep track of them in my reading journal. For my series tracker, I didn't change too much about this from my previous setup. I just have the headers at the top of the table, and then instead of boxing this whole table in this go around, I decided I just wanted it to be a little less distinct from the page, just to match with the theme a little better, and I just highlighted every other row with my light brown marker that I'd already been using in this setup. For my DNF graveyard, I also kept this the same layout and just changed the coloration and tombstone decor to match my theme. I decided to keep the same number as I DNF'd 6 books in 2024, including soft DNFs, and I figured I would probably DNF about the same number this year as well. Flipping the page into my physical reading tracker spread, I don't fill this out beforehand, and this is just kind of my way of incorporating a bookshelf into my yearly trackers since I don't do my books reading tracker in a bookshelf format. And this is really just more of a way for me to honor my physical reads since it is my least read format, but I do also, like everyone I think, have a book buying problem, so I really want to celebrate my physical reads extra, and I do that with this spread. I debated a little bit on how I wanted to color in this bookshelf and ultimately decided not to outline it because I wanted it to be a little bit more subtle and less harsh looking. I did outline all of the books though because I don't know at this point which colors I'll be picking for each month later in the year, and if they're darker, like in January, I wanted the outline to still show up and also so I could erase all the pencil lines safely. I also added some little decorative elements to the bookshelves that match my theme with the little lights, leaves, and mushroom terrarium. I also was getting a ton of questions about how I was doing the lettering since I'm very much a sketching before filming kind of person. So I threw up a quick picture, but I was referencing these embroidery letters for the most part, and I sketched out a square for each letter with one dot grid space between. Then I just tried to emulate the style of those embroidery letters. For all of the spreads prior to this one, I'd been using a 4x4 dot grid square for each letter, but this spread and the rest of the spreads I think all have a 3x3 dot grid square to be able to fit the full title on the page. Moving on to the other side of the journal is my library savings tracker. This past year was the first year I tracked this, and it was really fun to track, and I loved seeing what my total savings were from using the library. This was also definitely one of the quicker and simpler setups I had in this journal. This spread is just a table. I decided to do pretty much the same style of table as I did for my series tracker, but just added some column lines along with the header and footer in a darker brown color. And then my lettering is the same as usual, and that's the entire setup, so pretty quick and simple. Flipping the page to my book club tracker, like I mentioned, this is to track the book club picks for Sarah's All Shades book club, which focuses on diverse fantasy books, and I just printed out a picture for each cover for each month, and then I'll add the star rating along the right side of the cover once each book is in there and finished. This setup is super simple, and I didn't really want to add any decorative elements as this page will have quite a bit of color by the end with all the book covers and star ratings and everything, and I didn't want it to get too overwhelming. At this point, I did also try to film my process of sketching the lettering at the top before I colored it all in, but I didn't realize the combination of the angle I was filming at and how I angle my hand when I write would cover up so much of what I was doing while I was sketching it out, so I'm not sure how successful I was in showing the sketching phase of my lettering. Onto the other side of the journal, we have my only process step that is the correct aspect ratio and is much higher filming quality than the rest of my videos. This is for the traveling book club, which again, I decided on purpose to not really make this match the theme, partially because I set this up after the start of the year and partially because I really wanted it to have a very scrapbooky, stationery, packages and letters kind of vibe to it due to the nature of a traveling book club. A bunch of these stationery items are just random things that I've owned for years, so I have no clue where I got most of it. A lot of it is also just scrap paper, like all the brown paper behind the covers is not the Archer and Olive craft paper, it's just some other much thinner brown paper I had laying around. The one thing I do know where I got is all the washi tape and sticker decorations are pretty much from the Notebook Therapy Light Academia set. I got this when I bought my reading journal and I've low-key been using it all the time. For the names for each person, we each picked a different color to annotate the books in, and I used some metallic pens on some black paper in the color each person picked to add a little personalization. The books we're reading for the Traveling Book Club are Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, Here for the Wrong Reasons by Annabelle Paulson. We're actually not reading The Pact, which is the next one on here, but this person changed their pick after I'd already filmed this, which it was actually super easy to switch out the book cover and everything since stuff doesn't stick to the book cover super well, so I can peel that off really easily. And then I have a ton of that extra brown paper, so it was really easy to switch this out. But we're instead reading The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, which I have read before, but it was many years ago and I loved it and I'm super excited to reread it. They're There by Tommy Orange, Rules for Ghosting by Shelley J. Stone, A Scatter of Light by Melinda Lowe, and Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. Then going all the way back to the front of my journal, the very last thing to set up is my front fold out. I always have some kind of front fold out and it changes slightly from year to year, but I always set it up as something that I will need to reference a lot during the year or may need to reference with the journal open. In my previous journal, I had my reading system breakdown and reminders in that space, which is exactly what I carried over into this journal. For my reading system, I didn't change anything about it from how I was doing it for the past 6 months because in July of 2024, I decided the compile system was not working 100% the way I wanted it to, so I revamped and updated it into a slightly different system that has been working wonderfully for me. To make it match the theme as much as possible, I kept the typography and also used some craft paper to write my star breakdown on. The other thing I put in this little area is the Reading Challenges pocket. This was a new addition for this reading journal. In my old journal, I kind of had to stick the 2024-2025 fantasy bingo card into this area with some washi tape because I knew I would need to carry the board over into my 2025 reading journal. So in this setup, I decided to make a little pocket for this and any other reading challenges I end up joining so I could add them in at any time during the year without worrying about trying to find space for them, but they still have a designated space in the journal. In addition to my fantasy bingo card, one reading challenge I know I'm going to be adding and carrying over into multiple other journals is I'm going to start a reading around the world challenge this year that will definitely carry over into future years. I've been pretty good about actively diversifying my reading over the past couple of years, but I always notice when I'm going through and setting up my end of year stats that I read mostly books published in America, and if they're not published in America, they're almost always published in a country that is part of the Western world. So starting this year, I'm going to be making an effort to read from more countries, and this challenge will be ongoing until I've read a book from every country. So at some point I'll be printing out a blank map and putting it in this pocket as well to keep track of what countries I've read from and what countries I still need to read from. With that being said, that's my whole 2025 reading journal setup. If you watched all the way to the end, even through the weird aspect ratios and quality, I appreciate you so much. That's all I have for you today, and I'll see you again soon for some more journaling and bookish content.